just have a last couple of questions that I want to get your views and opinions on. We spoke about planning earlier on, the planning system, the interaction that has with protection of nature. So we're doing a planning bill at the moment, as you would be aware of, and we've integrated into that planning bill. When that first draft came out in January of 2023, there wasn't too much mention of biodiversity and nature protection in it. Subsequently, the National Biodiversity Action Plan was issued on a statutory footing, and we now have statements in the planning bill, or we have sections in the planning bill under the National Planning Framework, National Planning Statements, and the regional spatial strategies about the pursuit and achievement of the National Biodiversity Action Plan, the integration of the National Biodiversity Action Plan into the various subsidiary plans, and the preservation and protection of the environment and integration of the National Biodiversity Action Plan. So just in your view, to have the Biodiversity Action Plan on a statutory footing and to have that stated in primary legislation, what impact do you think that will have in terms of nature protection or the work that you do as well?
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
And it's an absolute game changer. And the really important thing, and colleagues would have referenced it here in pretty much every response we've given, walking nature across and nature protection across the full spectrum of relevant legislation, actions by state agencies and so forth is hugely important. Clearly having the statutory imperative is massive for us in terms of our coordination job on the National Biodiversity Action Plan. And even in terms of the huge engagement on drafting that in the first instance, and within government across those agencies, outside with the stakeholder community and so on and so forth. But it is an absolute game changer for us, and you know, that read across is just hugely important.
Okay, thanks. I think it's important there's a consistency there right from the very highest level of planning in this country, right down to the local urban area plans. And I was glad, Ms. Brian, that you mentioned in the nature restoration law that there's several other pillars to that as well. The entire focus seems to have been about farmland and wetland and peatland, but there's everything from the marine, the aquatic, to our urban environments as well. So it's important. That's important to state that as well. There was discussion way back about the creation of a wildlife crime prevention unit or a wildlife crime unit. And I think that sort of changed into a memorandum of understanding, working with Gardaí and working with different agencies. Can you, and you've had some great success actually in prosecuting wildlife crimes recently. So can you just tell me about the actions that have been taken there and what progress has been made in that area?
Thank you, Deputy. I'm just going to reach for my... yeah, I have it here. There was discussion. I suppose I should say at the outset, everybody in the National Parks and Wildlife Service does wildlife crime, and I remember in the past maybe walking the committee through the anatomy of a crime once committed and through the investigation process and all of that. I'm not going to do that today, but we have a directorate now with responsibility for wildlife enforcement and nature protection. I would take a directorate over a unit any day. I think that absolutely strengthens it. So the fourth, and you mentioned that, just to rehearse some of the issues, preventing and disrupting wildlife crime activities requires a multifaceted approach nationally. That's why we have an MOU with the Gardaí. That's why we're investing so much in training. That's why the emphasis we're putting on boots on the ground. Ranger colleagues, DCOs, regional managers, divisional managers. We've changed the entire structure, regional structure of the National Parks and Wildlife Service to create 9 new regions, and that has followed through with 9 divisional managers, an increased number of regional managers, DCOs, all the way down to boots on the ground. The target for rangers is to have 120 rangers in place by the end of this year. As recently as 2020, I think we were in the 60s in terms of the number of rangers we had on the ground. And again, the projection that I talked about in the context of the International Comparators Report sees that continuing that growth trajectory. In terms of the, just some metrics around this, in 2023, prosecutions for breaches of wildlife legislation, we had 43 prosecution cases sent to the Chief State Solicitors. 15 of those prosecution cases are still open, and 24 prosecution cases were closed in 2023. Okay. In 2024, in the year to date, 9 prosecution cases have been sent to the CSSO, and we usually see more cases sent in Q3 than in the earlier part of the year. And 18 prosecution cases have been closed so far this year. So, and those numbers compare very well with other agencies. We finally have the numbers for other agencies. And they are the prosecution cases. They don't take account of the number of files that might be open at any particular point in time, some of which are solved by local intervention that don't take up the time of the court. That's hugely important. That, again, colleagues talk to that engagement with communities, that engagement with people, that education piece, that prevention piece, and where we can make that kind of intervention, we will make it. So we benefit hugely from interagency cooperation through Garda Síochána. We've had a joint protocol workshop recently in Templemore, which was well received in AGS senior ranks, IFI, EPA and other organisations such as the Regional Veterinary Lab and State Lab and Revenue, Customs, ISPCA. So we cooperate, we cooperate with them, they cooperate with us. We're seeing a sea change in the application of the law. So we have a very high success rate in prosecution of wildlife crimes. 91% of the 169 cases with 284 defendants have been successful in the period 2019 to 2023, and I think that bears repeating, and that speaks to the quality, and I probably haven't said it enough in here today, the quality of our colleagues, the way they conduct their investigations, the rigour with which they pursue their investigations and adhering to all those evidential chain protocols and so on and so forth. They're not simple cases to prosecute, and very often the crime that's committed is egregious. It is very often stomach churning, to be honest. But that 91% success rate is huge. 70% of those cases have resulted in a fine or conviction, and the other 30%, a donation directed by the court or the application of the Probation Act. Prosecutions taken by other enforcement agencies, such as Inland Fisheries Ireland or Garda Síochána, would supplement our wildlife crime figures. So there are other agencies out there, and there's a massive level of cooperation between us and them, and vice versa. An often unseen huge effort by ANPWS in a number of hours is spent patrolling, monitoring, responding to reports, investigating, engaging with stakeholders, and preventing and deterring crimes. And we try and capture as much of that as we can as well. So that's just, I hope, some helpful statistics.
It is, it's very positive, and it's just thinking the increase in Rangers, the increases, or the success rate of prosecutions can also be one of those disincentives for people to actually carry out those crimes in the first place. If you know there's somebody, you know, if you don't think you're going to get caught, you try and get away with stuff. If you think it's likely, you may get caught. So there is that positive knock-on from that.
And again, Chair, that eye in the sky, the helicopter, the fire monitoring, the voluntary teams out. I mean, we've had a number of instances where our patrols have discovered people in the act of lighting a fire and stopped it there and then on the spot. So that kind of preventative work, that presence in the community, that visibility is hugely important.
Very good, thank you. Farm plans, we spoke about it earlier on, and I visited a site down in Maharamord in South Wicklow not so long ago. It's an SEC area, and the farmer couldn't have been more complimentary about the work being done with the NPWS down there and the assistance and the guidance, and it really is, to me, I'm not from a farming background, but to me it seems to be a very successful nature and farming combination there. So when you work with farmers on farm plans and give that advice, what's the kind of success rate? And what I mean is you know, sometimes people enter into this and say, God, like Deputy Flaherty was saying how complex it was, there was so many things to be done. Do you find that many farmers stick with it and say, it wasn't as complex as I thought it was going to be? Is there a kind of is there a dropout rate from it, or how do you measure how good your interactions or your farm plans are? That's a really good question, Chair. So good. I'm going to let Andy's going to come in first on that as our overall responsibility for the farm plans programme, and then maybe Ciara in relation to the experience with the LIFE programmes, and particularly with the Wild Atlantic Nature project. So Andy first, Chair, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Chair. Bespoke farm plans aren't for everybody. Some prefer more broad-scale national schemes. Our own scheme is quite small in scale, and it's bespoke and tailored not just to the needs of NPWS or the needs of biodiversity, but also the needs of the farmer. So in that brokering of a discussion, in some cases the farmer becomes highly enthused by the plan and commits to the plan not just for one cycle but for multiple cycles. We have farmers going into the third generation of plans. For others, they're not as enamoured by the process. They find it a bit slow, a bit tedious, a bit cumbersome. We're trying to streamline our processes. We're trying to make them more intuitive. The failing that all schemes make is ultimately they become administrative. We set terms and conditions and rules, and then penalties are applied and sanctions, etc. Sometimes we need to remind ourselves of the motivation of the scheme in the first place. What is it seeking to do? What is it seeking to change? And in simple terms, it's seeking to work with farmers who want to farm for nature and to reward them accordingly. If we can work that detail out, everything else is flotsam and jetsam in the process, but not to make the process so cumbersome that farmers lose interest in it or to get their payments it becomes too bureaucratic. So we're trying to find the sweet spot in that. We're not quite there yet. We're not seeking to replicate national schemes, but we're seeking to inform how national schemes might be designed so the learnings of our interaction with farmers at small scale can inform the rollout of national schemes like acres and cooperation projects. So hope that answered your question.
Yep. Thank you. And the life sites things?
And I'll come in very briefly on the life sites. One of the challenges, and Ciara will add the detail, Chair, if you have time. One of the challenges around life, the programmes tended to expire. There were 5 or 6 year programmes. And a key decision we've made, if these interventions are working, then life is for life, and not to be hackneyed about it. So we are mainstreaming those programmes that are coming to an end, if and when they're working. And by and large, they're working. The life intervention on raised bogs was superb. The life intervention on Corn Creek is really working. We're really seeing the numbers. And above all, we're hearing the Corn Creek. So those schemes and those programmes are now being mainstreamed back into NPWS. So the farmer has certainty that, where he's made or she's made that successful intervention in relation to nature, that will continue. And they're being remunerated for it. The range of payment in relation to Corn Creek life, for instance, is from 300 to about 11,000. The average payment is about 3,000. So the farmer recognises that if they are farming for nature, A, they will be remunerated for that service, but B, we will mainstream that scheme if it's working. So, Ciara, I don't know if you wanted to come in, Chair, if we have time.
Yeah.
Just in relation to the Corn Creek Life, for example, there's 150 odd farmers in there, and I suppose what has been found to be key really is to be very clear about what we're looking for in the scheme, to be very clear about what the farmer is measuring, so that I think we can say it's operating on a sort of no surprises basis. The farmer knows exactly, they have their scorecard, they can measure it, and very, very importantly, they can show their colleagues, they can show their neighbours exactly how it works, and they know how to get from A to B, and they know what a results base looks like. I think we have a similar number in our Life on Macro programme, and again on the same basis, farmers will bring other farmers in and the word will spread. Again, it goes back to what Andy was saying. We need to make it make sense for farmers, and over-regulating the schemes and overburdening people with paperwork isn't something we found to be successful. Now, what we have to absorb, I think, and some of the lessons from Wild Atlantic Nature, which are really clear, are that you need to have boots on the ground and people out engaging on the ground, and that's quite resource heavy for us to make it work, and that's why the LIFE programme is such a support. But again, we will be integrating those. I think the development of the LIFE project, which Andy was very involved in, informed the whole approach to results-based payments down the line, and that's what we want to do. We want to be able to pilot things in those projects that then will roll out nationally, and there's huge evidence of successful pilot interventions coming in, particularly from WAN, and they had that very big European award very recently, and they're engaging with communities all over the place. But it takes people to do it more than paper, and sometimes maybe the temptation for professional bureaucratic organisations is where you don't have enough people, maybe you just generate quite a lot of paper instead
Not this.
for safety. But the people on the ground and that visibility piece is extraordinarily effective. And the goodwill, our experience is that the goodwill is there if you make it possible for people.
And can I just ask, I think, Mr. Dunny, you said that these are 5-year plans. Was that one of them?
They're variable, yeah. I think
one of the things with farmers, and I know this from engaging with them, that they're like any other business. They need to know a bit of certainty into the future. They can't be told, don't produce milk, and then be told, produce loads of milk, and then be told, don't produce milk. You know, they need to have certainty, and I think they've been kind of led from one side of the road to the other a lot of the time. So in those plans, some of them are short-termish in duration, are they?
the life programs tend to be, I mean, the longest one in my experience has been the SNAP one that we referred to earlier on. That's a 9-year program. I think that the Living Bog was, what was it? It was maybe a 5-year program. Concrete, Andy, was 5. And the one is 7. The Wild Atlantic Nature Project is 7. But you're absolutely right. The signal that we, and I come from a farming background, so I'm fully appreciative of the view that, you know, the market sends you a signal. It sends you a signal about milk, or it sends you a signal on headage, or it sends you a signal on sheep, and that's what it tended to do. What we need to make sure is that the signal that's coming in relation to nature is constant and consistent. And that's the message that we are about. This is not something that's going to stop. It is something that is going to be a constant. And we recognise that there is an investment of time and an investment of effort and an investment of resource by the landowner. And like any resource, it is producing a good. If that good is a nature service, then we need to be in the space that rewards that nature service, the production of that nature service. Plain and simple. And you're right, we need to be giving the farmer and the landowner who's producing those services that certainty that we're going to be there next year and the year after and the year after, because nature doesn't stop. The seasons don't stop changing. And I think in the context of where we are at in relation to those annexed habitats, those really important habitats, the need to continue to nurture and protect will continue to exist. That's why the Nature Restoration Law is a 2050 programme. So.
Very good. No, I do agree with you. Any effort requires reward, and just because you've restored land with the concrete back doesn't mean you can turn your back on them. Because why would you? You know, you're not. It's not for the good of your health. Last question I have. You'd be happy to hear. Many years ago, when I was studying environmental matters, the key issues on nature and environment were pollution, invasive species, habitat fragmentation, climate change. Which ones are we winning the battle on, and which ones are we still losing the battles on, and still, which is the what are the success stories that we have there at the moment? Are they still the key impacts on our wildlife and our nature out there?
That's quite the question. That is good. They are all. I mean, it's unremitting. I mean, there is a constant challenge in all of those spaces. I think we can, speaking for ourselves in terms of our area of responsibility around nature and all of those impacting it. Pollution is a major problem for us in the uplands, and you're very aware of what. Of the Leave No Trace campaign, etc. That has been hugely successful in terms of the engagement with it. You know, if I can look at two things that cross boundaries, we are inextricably, what we do is inextricably linked to climate change and climate adaptation, and vice versa. There is absolutely no doubt about that. We can certainly point to success stories, but the ongoing challenge of education, the ongoing challenge of protection, the ongoing challenge of dealing with invasive species, and there's one particular one, like our addressing the rhododendron one, and I think we've cleared the guts of, in Glenveigh and Killarney, probably nearly 2,000 hectares of rhododendron in the last 3 years, which is remarkable because we're going at it very hard. But that is something that we need to revisit again and again and again because it resurges. So I think the message from us is that the challenge of nature protection is a 24/7 challenge. We have an awful long way to go, but I think, to borrow Andy's phrase, or maybe your question earlier on, are we turning the ship in terms of societal engagement with nature restoration and nature protection? Absolutely. Is there an engagement with climate action and climate adaptation? For sure. Pollution too. I think people are much more aware of the impacts these have and how they reinforce each other with negative outcomes for society, and very negative outcomes in some instances. So, work in progress, Chair.
Okay, well, on that note, I would urge you to keep up the work that you're doing, because anybody who spends a day in nature, like, you reap the reward for that for a long, long time. You know, you can spend a day in the city, you can spend a night out, but you spend a day in the countryside or just out there in nature with your family or with your children, it's, you know, the reward for that, and it's often free. And when, you know, when you damage it, when it's gone, you really don't realise it until it's gone. You know, I could quote the lyrics from a song that most people do at that point, but, you know, it's true. Once it's gone, it's gone. So, look, I want to thank you for the work you've been doing. I hope this type of support and investment into the National Parks and Wildlife Service continues. Like we said, it can't be just a 5-year window. No. It needs to be the next 5 and the next 10 and the next 20, because it is a challenge. I know we talk about climate as being the challenge of the decade for us. But biodiversity loss, nature loss, is that kind of one that doesn't get the same amount of spotlight and recognition, and that may do us a lot more harm and damage a lot quicker than climate change may do. So I want to thank you very much for your attendance, and to all your staff as well who are out there on the ground. I would said to you earlier on, it's great to see National Parks and Wildlife Service staff out there. Did you spot them now? Did you see them? It used to be like trying to spot a corncrake or find a corncrake, but now you have more chance of spotting a ranger now, but corncrake's coming back too. Okay, good everybody. I'm going to suspend or adjourn joint committee until July 2nd at 11 a.m. Thank you.